Democrats, all are women of color, all are U.S. citizens. On Sunday, he appeared to go after Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, and Rashida Tlaib when he posted, "So interesting to see progressive Democrat congresswomen who originally came from countries whose governments are a complete and total catastrophe, now loudly and viciously telling the people of the United States, the greatest and most powerful nation on earth, how our government is to be run. Why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came? Then come back and show us how it's done." Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Trump's outburst, quote, reaffirms his plan to make America great again has always been about making America white again. Then this morning, the president went there again. Quote, when will the radical left congresswoman apologize to our country, the people of Israel, and even to the office of the president for the foul language they have used and the terrible things they have said? So many people are angry at them and their horrible and disgusting actions. Peter Baker analyzed the outburst for the New York Times. Quote, his assumption that the House Democrats must have been born in another country or that they did not belong here, if they were, fits as an us against them political strategy that has been at the heart of Mr. Trump's presidency from the start. Heading into next year's election, he appears to be drawing a deep line between the white, native-born America of his memory and the ethnically diverse, increasingly foreign-born country he is presiding over, challenging voters in 2020 to declare which side of that line they are on. Well, during a Made in America event at the White House today, the president, armed with notes, including his own special spelling of al-Qaeda, went there again.
And all I'm saying that if they're not happy here, they can leave. They can leave, and you know what? I'm sure that there'll be many people that won't miss them. I look at Omar, I don't know, I never met her. I hear the way she talks about al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda has killed many Americans.
Are you
but
okay
these are
with people thinking your tweets are racist, Mr. President?
Quiet.
Are you okay with people thinking your tweets are racist, sir?
Quiet.
It doesn't concern you that many people saw that tweet as racist and that white nationalist groups are finding common cause with you on that point.
It doesn't concern me because many people agree with me. These are people that hate our country. Hey, John, they hate our country. They hate it, I think, with a passion. Now, it's possible I'm wrong. The voter will decide.
So that was on the White House lawn, and hours later, the four members of Congress spoke on Capitol Hill.
The recent tweets and words from the president are simply a continuation of his racist and xenophobic playbook.
He's launching a blatantly racist attack on 4 duly elected members of the United States of House of Representatives, all of whom are women of color. This is the agenda of white nationalists. This is his plan to pit us against one another.
All of this is a distraction. It's a distraction from what's most important and from our core values as American citizens.
I encourage the American people and all of us in this room and beyond to not take the bait. This is a disruptive distraction from the issues of care, concern, and consequence to the American people.
The president couldn't resist live tweeting that event. Quote, the Dems were trying to distance themselves from the 4 progressives, but now they are forced to embrace them. That means they are endorsing socialism, hate of Israel and the USA. Not good for the Democrats. With that, and here for our leadoff discussion on a Monday night, Ashley Parker, Pulitzer Prize-winning White House reporter for The Washington Post, Annie Carney, White House reporter for The New York Times, and Aaron Haynes-Wack is back with us, national writer covering race and ethnicity for the Associated Press. Good evening and welcome to the three of you. Ashley, I'd like to begin with you. This has now dominated, give or take, 48 hours worth of news cycles. How are they feeling about this deep in Trump land?
Well, a couple ways. It's first worth noting that in talking to people inside the White House today, one thing they said was, this does not feel like the aftermath of Charlottesville. It is not that sort of core shaking issue inside the building. There is some frustration, but a lot of the frustration is kind of twofold. One is that they were enjoying the Democrats fighting and feuding with each other, and they felt like the president stepped in and gave Speaker Pelosi an off-ramp and helped her unify her caucus. And they were also frustrated that they felt like the president, he went, I mean, he clearly went too far, but they sort of felt like had he not gone too far and had he not ceded the moral high ground, there was actually a compelling argument they could have made using some of those Democratic lawmakers' comments on Israel to do what the president tried to do in that final tweet and paint them as sort of socialists and, you know, far too left and kind of paint Democrats with that broad brushstroke. And again, they felt like by making this comment that was racist, which is not a word they use, he ceded the moral high ground, and then today was basically what was supposed to be cleanup. He walked out there with those notes. That was intentional. They wanted the president, and the president himself wanted to expand on and clarify his comments. But after he did those sort of 8 to 10 minutes in the on the South Lawn, some aides said that wasn't quite the cleanup and the explanation they were hoping for.
And Annie Carney, speaking of the cleanup in aisle 2, I'm going to play 2 things for you and our audience. We'll talk about them on the other side. First is Mark Short on the North Lawn of the White House. The second is the Secretary of the Treasury from today.
I don't think that the president's intent in any way is racist.
How is it not racist to tell women of color to go back to their countries when most of them were born here anyway and they're all U.S. citizens?
Kristen, he has an Asian woman of color in his cabinet.
Do you find the president's tweets racist, and what do you make of white nationalists praising those tweets?
Again, I think the president, I don't find them racist. The president just went on and clarified his comments. I think he speaks for himself on that, and he was very clear. But again, we're focused on cryptocurrencies.
So, Annie, just to review there, the president has an Asian woman of color in his cabinet, and the Treasury Secretary would much rather focus on cryptocurrencies. Tell us about your reporting regarding Trump's staff, and as a subset of that question, is this another one of those times we're going to learn that Jared and Ivanka were on vacation?
No, well, I asked Ivanka specifically for comment today, and she declined to comment, which is notable. Again, if we're comparing this to Charlottesville, which was almost 2 years ago, next month it will be 2 years, she at that time put out a statement condemning white supremacy outright, which was a notable break from what her father had failed to do. This time she's silent, no tweets, no statement, declined to comment when I asked her today. But what we saw from aides today was privately, I talked to more than half a dozen current and former White House officials who said that it was a hard statement to defend what Trump had said. They understood why it was being seen as racist, even if they wouldn't call it such. But like Ashley said, not the kind of soul-searching we saw after Charlottesville, where we saw Gary Cohn, who was at the time Trump's top economic advisor, actually publicly condemned the remarks and draft a resignation letter that he ultimately didn't send to the president, but he was close to actually making a move because of what the president had done. Nothing like that happened in the White House today. No aides condemned what Trump said. Mark Short tried to offer a defense there, pointing to Elaine Chao. You know, pointing to one person is never a strong defense in the face of a charge of racism. But I think what Mark Short was trying to do there was not to steer the conversation away from a global conversation about whether or not Trump is racist, and say he was speaking specifically about Omar and other members of the Democratic Party who are seen as progressive and problematic for their specific views. And then what we saw with Steve Mnuchin there, who notably was an aide who defended Trump after Charlottesville, was a hard, no, he's not racist, but we want to talk about other things. Mnuchin was kind of caught today because he had this briefing on cryptocurrency and he couldn't avoid a question on Trump's tweets. So this was another example of these racist flare-ups put aides in a very awkward position where they are forced to defend the president even when they privately wish he hadn't said what he said.
And Aaron, for you, I have 2 reactions that aired on cable television tonight, which we'll discuss on the other side.
Donald Trump is at it again, as he was in 2016. He has nothing to offer. Therefore, he is going to create division and hate for political expediency purpose. I am saddened but not surprised.
I get calls every day saying, go back, Mohammed lover. This is something that lots of Americans experience every single day, and that's why I think this is getting a resonance in the way others do.
Aaron, I talked at the top of the broadcast about old tropes, which, come to think of it, is probably exactly redundant. They're tropes because they've been around for a while. These are no less hurtful or damaging or familiar to millions of Americans, and that's why they had instant resonance, correct?
That's absolutely correct, Brian. Good evening. It's good to be with you. And what I will tell you is that I spent my day talking to several Americans who, have gone throughout their lives hearing from people, go back to where you came from. Muslim Americans, Latino Americans. In fact, I would venture to say that probably, these 4 congresswomen who were targeted by the president it's probably not the first time that they heard go back to where you came from, although, certainly they probably didn't expect to hear that from the President of the United States. But this is certainly an old trope that is now, reappearing in the national conversation because of the president's tweet. And listen, this is also not new for this president, as we know. I mean, he entered the modern, his modern political career began with him questioning President Barack Obama's citizenship. His campaign launched, with him talking about Mexicans as rapists. And, we saw him going to a racial playbook that was effective for him in 2016, in 2018. And it certainly seems to be something that he is going to be headed into 2020 because we know that it is something that works. As he said today in the Rose Garden, there are many people that love what I said, and I think that is certainly true. He is right about that. There are people who are definitely in agreement with his remarks, and not just evidenced by his retweets, but by the support that he continues to have. And so, just as he has targeted folks like California Congresswoman Maxine Waters, in previous elections, I think that he's already identified Representatives Ocasio-Cortez, Presley, Tlaib, and Omar as folks that he can target to, really energize his base headed into the next election.
And Ashley, here we are back in the studio. When we were last here on the air Friday night, we were showing the imagery of Mike Pence and assorted U.S. Senate. This leaves no question who you're voting to reelect or not.
Well, this certainly offers a very clear glimpse into the sort of campaign that President Trump is planning to run for re-election, which is, as far as we've seen, sort of stoking racial animus across the nation. And it's fascinating because you talk to his campaign, you talk to people in his world advisors, and they claim they're trying to expand the map into places like Oregon and New Mexico. They claim they're actually serious about building coalitions to make inroads in inner cities, in African-American communities, in Hispanic communities. But then you look at not just where the president is traveling, but what he is saying and what he is doing. And it is very clear that so far, at least, he is running on a base enthusiasm and retention strategy, which in a lot of ways does involve this red meat, these controversial statements and these racist statements. And one thing that people don't entirely understand is if you've ever gone to a Trump rally and you've interviewed his supporters and his base, they are 100% with him. And they're the sort of people who would probably vote for him even if he hadn't come out and sent these racist tweets. And so it doesn't necessarily make sense when you realize to win a re-election, you have to get to 50+1. But that is right now the strategy that the president is running.
Aaron, how do we think that inner city approach is going to work?
Well, I do think that, again, I would say that racism is on the ballot, especially for Democrats and Democrats of color in particular. President Trump's rhetoric and some of the policies that we've seen with regard to race that are affecting communities of color are galvanizing a lot of these communities. And so I think that while, yes, it certainly is something that's going to energize his base, it also has the potential to energize a lot of Democrats who want to reject this version of America and say that, this is not who we are. And, will be possibly coming out to vote against this as much as they're voting for anything headed into next year.
And Annie, let's try to be clear and transparent here. We try to call out shiny objects whenever we can. This was more than that, but what this has done tonight is knock the story about changing the asylum rules at our southern border out of the top tier of news stories we're covering tonight. Sometimes things are what they look like directly, and they don't require reflection. Is this, Annie, what it appears to be, that they're going to double down on a strategy of fear?
I think that's right. Donald Trump it's more than a dog whistle. He has made clear what kind of campaign he wants to run. I heard a mix today that from inside the White House there was some disappointment that he had stepped on this inter-party feud between Nancy Pelosi and the so-called squad. But then there was another group of people associated with the campaign who said, this is helpful, having Pelosi and having other Democrats defending the far left of their party is right where Trump wants them, because it's going to be a race against socialism, pinning them all to these policies of Omar and Ocasio-Cortez and Democrats who are not even on the ballot. This is who Trump wants. These four women of color, progressives, are who Trump wants the Democratic Party to be associated with. These are women who the campaign was distributing a poll that was done that showed Omar's favorability among voters that Trump is trying to appeal to very low in states that matter, like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So this is a divisive fight that he wants, that he thinks is a winning strategy, and he's in the thick of an election season right now.
Can't thank our big three enough for helping us start off the broadcast and a new week tonight. To Ashley Parker, to Annie Carney, to Aaron Haynes-Wack, thank you all.
They hate Israel. They hate our own country. They're calling the guards along our border, the Border Patrol agents, concentration camp guards. They accuse people who support Israel of doing it for the Benjamins. They're anti-Semitic. They're anti-America. Don't get down. Aim higher. We don't need to know anything about them personally. Talk about their policies.
So, one man's opinion there. That's one way to look at this incendiary material from the president this weekend. Another way is this from the other senator from South Carolina, also a Republican, Tim Scott. He called what the president spewed, quote, unacceptable personal attacks and racially offensive language. No matter our political disagreements, aiming for the lowest common denominator will only divide our nation further. That was after Scott agreed with Trump that the Democrats are pro-socialism. While most Republicans remain silent, not all of them. Over 24 Republicans, including 9 other senators, spoke up today to condemn the president's remarks. And after first taking a pass on the subject and saying nothing, now Mitt Romney has weighed in.
The President of the United States has a noble and unique role to unite the country and to draw on all people, regardless of their race, their color, their national origin. And in that regard, the President, I think, failed with his comments yesterday and again with the comments today. I believe it's really incumbent upon the President to bring us together, and that's a responsibility that I think he should take very seriously.
Chuck Schumer's calling the tweets and the comments racist. Would you agree with Chuck Schumer on that point?
I think Senator Tim Scott indicated that he believed that the comments were racially offensive. I think that's an appropriate characterization.
And we may hear from Mitch McConnell tomorrow, so there's that. Here with more, the political reaction to all of it, Philip Rucker, Pulitzer Prize-winning White House bureau chief for The Washington Post. And Lanhee Chen is back with us, research fellow at the Hoover Institution and former presidential campaign advisor to both Marco Rubio and Mitt Romney. Phil, I'd like to begin with you. Why these four, As they say in the airline business, the president has his choice in targets every day. He's got scores of millions of followers on social media. Why these 4 women?
It's a good question, Brian. I think these 4 women were chosen as targets for him in a way because they've been targets in the media now for many months, certainly on Fox News, among the various commentators that the president tends to take his advice from. But they've also been in the news for the last week or two regarding their fight with Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker. So they've been elevated in national discourse and therefore, I think, seized the attention of the president. But they also have something else in common, which is that they're all 4 women. They're all 4 brown and black women of color, and they're freshmen in the House who have come here with an elected mandate from the 2018 midterms to not only hold the president accountable, but to try to enact some progressive change that their constituents wanted. They're from very blue, democratically heavy districts, of course, but nonetheless, they feel like they've come to Congress with a mandate, and it's in direct conflict with the agenda of this president.
And Lanhee Chen, I have a quote for you. This is from Politico. It regards your political party. Much of the congressional GOP is still navigating the episode gingerly, trying to break with Trump's rhetoric while avoiding blowback from the president. It's a familiar quandary made more difficult than most of the daily controversies of the Trump presidency, given the inflammatory nature of his latest statements. Lanhee, to put it bluntly, is a party of supplicants and sycophants just the way it's going to be?
Well, as long as I think the president has the level of approval as he does from the Republican base, you're going to continue to see a very difficult tightrope act. And frankly, it's something, if you think back to the campaign, there were a number of comments the president made during the campaign, comments about Judge Curie turned in a different direction. So I would expect to see this kind of difficulty amongst a lot of Republicans in criticizing the president going forward.
Well, let me ask you about the sheer politics of this, however hateful millions of Americans found his words. Is this really a strategy to try to pick up independents and disaffected Democrats? Is this going to pick off anyone not in the column?
No, and I don't think that's what this is about. I think, frankly, a lot of people in the Trump camp see this as an opportunity to continue to drive base enthusiasm, to continue and make sure that those people are getting out to vote, to create that energy, because the worst thing in the world would be for that base to be somehow lethargic when it comes to the 2020 election. So I think it clearly is not a strategy driven at independent voters. It's a strategy driven at continuing to animate that base. And by the way, it's tied to the immigration dialogue. It's tied to other things which the president has seized on in recent weeks. So, no, I don't think it's a strategy for independent voters. I think it's a strategy for base mobilization.
Phil Rucker, in the category of uncomfortable smiles, no one has McConnell and McCarthy beat. I raise this because we note on the White House schedule there's a 4 o'clock Republican congressional leadership meeting with the president. What's that going to be like?
To be a fly on that wall. We'll see what that meeting is like. I mean, look, the president is going to have to explain himself, I think, and explain these comments. We've notably not heard from Mitch McConnell, the highest-ranking Republican on Capitol Hill. He has been silent. By the way, most of those Republicans who commented today about this were silent for the first 24 hours after the tweet. It was not until the media paid so much attention to this story this morning, last night, that some of these lawmakers started to speak out about it, including Mitt Romney. But look, the meeting tomorrow with the Republican leadership of Congress, you know, the president has an agenda he wants to try to get something done on. He has really done nothing legislatively for the last several months, you might say all the way back to criminal justice reform at the end of last year. There's a debt ceiling issue that they're contending with right now, and he's going to want to focus on that, but this is a huge distraction.
Yeah, let's be sure that we just heard from Mitt Romney there. Mitt Romney had a first chance to address this. He was approached by a local political reporter at the airport in Boston. He took a pass and walked away, and after some reflection, after increased verbiage by the president, we just saw tonight Mitt Romney's reaction. Both of these gentlemen are going to stay with us over a break. break, House Democrats introduced a resolution condemning President Trump's racist comments directed at members of Congress. Amber Phillips of the Washington Post pointing out this resolution leaves Republican lawmakers in a tough spot, as you might imagine. They will be forced to choose between what for them are a couple of politically bad options: vote for the resolution in what will be seen as unequivocal rebuke of Trump's words, or vote against it in what could be seen as a tacit approval of the sentiments he expressed in those tweets. We asked Phil Rucker and Lanhee Chen to stay with us. And Phil, I'd like to go to you. We've just learned this vote is called for 7 p.m. Eastern time, obviously because they watch Chris Matthews. My question to you is, with cynicism taking as deep a hold as it has in our society, will this look like theater or will this look real?
I think, Brian, a little bit of both. In a way, it's a real vote because this is the House Speaker Pelosi and the Democrats in the House trying to do something beyond issuing statements decrying the president. They're trying to take some sort of action to vote, to use their power in the majority of the House to chastise this president in a formal way. On the other hand, it is theater insofar as it's an effort, as Amber Phillips laid out in that piece you just read from, to get these House Republicans on the record on this issue. It's a very difficult vote for the Republicans to make. I believe the Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy this evening indicated that he did not think this vote would be productive. So you're going to see some opposition there. But the reality is the Democrats control the floor. And if they want to bring this up for a vote, they certainly can.
And Lanhee, a serious question. If I was with the Trump campaign and out of deference and respect for your political experience and resume and advanced degrees, came to you and said, we want you to head our minority outreach for 2020. Serious question. What would you do? Where would you start?
Well, look, I think that I probably would start with the economic message. I think that's probably where they have to go. The president's been out there saying, for example, that he's done a lot for Latino unemployment rates, for African-American unemployment rates. I just don't know if any of that breaks through, frankly, in this environment we're in. You know, and this is interesting because all of this is coming on the heels of what was being covered extensively last week as this intra-party fight on the Democratic side of the aisle. You had these very 4 members of Congress running up against Speaker Pelosi, and that conflict was at the center of the news cycle last week. It gave Republicans and the president a potential opportunity, and now, you know, we're in a very different place right now. So I think it's a tough job. It's one that I would not envy, and you know, I'm not sure it'd be very successful as a strategy.
Thanks to you guys for always being terrific guests. Philip Rucker, Lanhee Chen, greatly appreciate you.
In his home is somebody that I think could present a danger to the community.
David Boies, one of 2 lawyers there. That's because 2 of Jeffrey Epstein's accusers were in court today to plead with a judge to deny bail to the man who may now be the best-known sex offender in our country. One accuser today told the judge she was sexually abused by Epstein starting at the age of 14, and that, quote, he's a scary person to have walking the streets. Their pleas came as prosecutors offered new evidence to support their case that Epstein should remain behind bars and should not see the light of day. According to court records, just this morning, the government became aware that in a locked safe in the defendant's mansion, there were piles of cash, dozens of diamonds, and a passport appearing to be issued from a foreign country. The passport said to be registered to a fake name despite showing Epstein's photo and listing his residence as Saudi Arabia. Epstein is accused of paying underage girls for sex and paying his victims to go out and recruit other girls that in turn were then assaulted. He pleaded not guilty to sex trafficking and conspiracy charges. His lawyers say he's willing to post as much as $100 million if a judge will only let him await trial in his mansion, his townhouse on the Upper East Side
here at
of
MSNBC
Manhattan.
headquarters
With
in
us
New
here
York.
tonight to talk about it, a returning veteran to our broadcast, Cynthia Alksny. She also happens to be a former federal prosecutor. Cynthia, any clues to tell you where this judge is going to go?
Well, sure. I mean,
Every bit of evidence that came out today suggests that this man should not get bail. And there were some other interesting clues besides what's obvious, right? You know, fake passport, lots of money, planes, tampering with witnesses, strong case, big incentive. I mean, you make a big, long list. But then there were a couple of interesting exchanges with the defense attorneys. For instance, at one point, one of the defense attorneys said, well, it's not like he's an out-of-control rapist. And the judge said, well, how do you know? That wasn't a good sign. At one point, the defense attorney said, well, you know, he's been able to control himself. He's been disciplined for the last couple of years. Okay, first of all, it's a dumb argument because it's an admission that he wasn't disciplined before and that he requires discipline, number one. And number two, the judge immediately said, you know, the data kind of goes the other way. The data is the longer you've been away from jail or from intervention through law enforcement, the more likely you are to commit more crimes. So a couple of times the defense attorneys tried to push the limit and the judge pushed back.
I keep thinking of this guy's life and how he lived it right up until he didn't. He was arrested landing at a New York City area airport on his jet.
And right now on Andrea Mitchell Reports, born in the USA, President Trump fires off
of freedom he had walking the earth. We're getting on a private jet, presumably after a dinner in Paris, to fly back to this country, and that'll be it. The rest of his days will be lived out behind bars?
I think it's more than possible. I think it's probable. Because the law really does demand that this man stay in jail awaiting trial. And the case is just getting stronger, according to the prosecutors. Because the longer he's in jail, it gives these victims a chance really to exhale and feel safe, and more victims can come forward. And in fact, the prosecutor said more were coming forward. The evidence is getting stronger. The New Mexico Attorney General is investigating. And we are going to make a decision about at some point whether or not that's child pornography in his safe, which would suggest a superseding indictment and even more time. And who knows what else is in that safe, if those are blackmail CDs, if those are child pornography CDs. So it's just going to snowball and snowball. I think it's probable he never sees the light of day. And I have to say, I don't care or cry for him.
Reading the press coverage of this guy's life, we've all seen the bold-faced names that have become intertwined with him. People he has flown around the world, people he has hosted at his ranch in New Mexico, at his island down in the Caribbean, at his place in New York. How, in a case like this, as it progresses, will those people come to have real worries that the bold-faced names will become unfurled in this proceeding? Will there be an effort to kind of separate them out?
Well, it looks like in the next couple of perhaps days, we're going to have 2,000 pages of discovery material from a civil case. And from what we understand, there are going to be some bold-faced names in that discovery as it's released. It's likely that whoever has been involved with this man, the truth is going to end up coming out, as it should, no matter who it is. You know, I'm a lifelong Democrat. If there are Democrats in there, let it come out. If there are Republicans in there, let it come out. This should not be about politics. This is, if anybody abused those girls, it ought to come out and they ought to be prosecuted, and I'm for it.
Yeah, hear, hear. I think most thinking individuals would agree with that. Cynthia, we have had you on. I guess this is the first off-topic time we have asked you to come on. It's normally been about the central topic of our times, specifically the Mueller report, the investigation. We've been led to believe his testimony will now be next week. If you were on that committee, if you were the staff director for one of those two committees, what's the one question and how would you put it to him?
Well, I think the one question is, did you believe the President of the United States obstructed justice? And I think we need to know that. But having said that, I'm not sure we're going to get much out of him. I mean, he's very much this is the four corners of the document. He's going to be not an easy person to question because he really believes that that report ought to be all he has to say. I hope they continue to pressure him. I do think he has an obligation to tell us the answer to that question. I don't know if he will. But let me say on this topic, on the Epstein topic, this is how I started as a prosecutor in the Sex Crimes Division. And I feel like the obligation of the United States government to these victims is overwhelming, and they have been failed. And we really need this time around to get it right.
Yeah, it is profound. And considering the age they were when their lives were ruined, or so alleged in this case, it's remarkable in its sweep. Cynthia Oxney, always
Let's hope they're not ruined, Brian. Let's hope they're not ruined. Let's hope they heal.
Yeah, I just don't know how one is strong enough to heal from these wounds. Cynthia Oxney, thank you. Always a pleasure to have you on. We appreciate it. Coming.
This tweets racist, and what do you make of white nationalists praising those tweets?
Again, I think the president, I don't find them racist. The president just went on and clarified his comments. I think he speaks for himself on that, and he was very clear. But again, we're focused on cryptocurrencies.
So, Annie, just to review there, the president has an Asian woman of color in his cabinet, and the Treasury Secretary would much rather focus on cryptocurrencies. Tell us about your reporting regarding Trump's staff, and as a subset of that question, is this another one of those times we're going to learn that Jared and Ivanka were on vacation?
No, well, I asked Ivanka specifically for comment today, and she declined to comment, which was notable. Again, if we're comparing this to Charlottesville, which was almost 2 years ago, next month it will be 2 years, she at that time put out a statement condemning white supremacy outright, which was a notable break from what her father had failed to do. This time she's silent, no tweets, no statement, declined to comment when I asked her today. But what we saw from aides today was privately, I talked to more than half a dozen current and former White House officials who said that it was a hard statement to defend what Trump had said. They understood why it was being seen as racist, even if they wouldn't call it such. But like Ashley said, not the kind of soul-searching we saw after Charlottesville, where we saw Gary Cohn, who was at the time Trump's top economic advisor, actually publicly condemned the remarks and draft a resignation letter that he ultimately didn't send to the president, but he was close to actually making a move because of what the president had done. Nothing like that happened in the White House today. No aides condemned what Trump said. Mark Short tried to offer a defense there, pointing to Elaine Chao. You know, pointing to one person is never a strong defense in the face of a charge of racism. But I think what Mark Short was trying to do there was not to steer the conversation away from a global conversation about whether or not Trump is racist, and say he was speaking specifically about Omar and other members of the Democratic Party who are seen as progressive and problematic for their specific views. And then what we saw with Steve Mnuchin there, who notably was an aide who defended Trump after Charlottesville, was a hard no, he's not racist, but we want to talk about other things. Mnuchin was kind of caught caught today because he had this briefing on cryptocurrency, and he couldn't avoid a question on Trump's tweets. So this was another example of these racist flare-ups put aides in a very awkward position where they are forced to defend the president even when they privately wish he hadn't said what he said.
And Aaron, for you, I have two reactions that aired on cable television tonight, which we'll discuss on the other side.
Donald Trump is at it again, as he was in 2016. He has nothing to offer. Therefore, he is going to create division and hate for political expediency purpose. I am saddened but not surprised.
I get calls every day saying, go back, Mohammed lover. This is something that lots of Americans experience every single day, and that's why I think this is getting a resonance in the way others do.
Aaron, I talked at the top of the broadcast about old tropes, which, come to think of it, is probably exactly redundant. They're tropes because they've been around for a while. These are no less hurtful or damaging or familiar to millions of Americans, and that's why they had instant resonance, correct?
That's absolutely correct, Brian. Good evening. It's good to be with you. And what I will tell you is that I spent my day talking to several Americans who, have gone throughout their lives hearing from people, go back to where you came from. Muslim Americans, Latino Americans, In fact, I would venture to say that probably, these 4 congresswomen who were targeted by the president it's probably not the first time that they heard go back to where you came from, although, certainly they probably didn't expect to hear that from the President of the United States. But this is certainly an old trope that is now, reappearing in the national conversation because of the president's tweet. And listen, this is also not new for this president, as we know. I mean, he entered the modern, his modern political career began with him questioning President Barack Obama's citizenship. His campaign launched, with him talking about Mexicans as rapists. And, we saw him going to a racial playbook that was effective for him in 2016, in 2018. And it certainly seems to be something that he is going to be headed into 2020 because we know that it is something that works. As he said today in the Rose Garden, there are many people that love what I said, and I think that is certainly true. He is right about that. There are people who are definitely in agreement with his remarks, and not just evidenced by his retweets, but by the support that he continues to have. And so, just as he has targeted folks like California Congresswoman Maxine Waters, in previous elections, I think that he's already identified Representatives Ocasio-Cortez, Presley, Tlaib, and Omar as folks that he can target to, really energize his base headed into the next election.
And Ashley, here we are back in the studio. When we were last here on the air Friday night, we were showing the imagery of Mike Pence and assorted U.S. senators. This leaves no question who you're voting to reelect or not.
Well, this certainly offers a very clear glimpse into the sort of campaign that President Trump is